parents to blame for child criminals? 0207 862 2222 is the number. The number of under-18s caught committing crimes, including serious offences such as violence and robbery, has increased since lockdown, according to analysis of official figures. There were over 58,500 arrests of children in the year until March. That's a 9% rise on the previous year and 16% higher than at the start of the pandemic. And as Sir Keir Starmer today teams up with Idris Elba to crack down on youth knife crime, it's been revealed that children made up almost 1 in 5 arrests for weapon possession. So let's start with you, Wilfred. Do you think that it's fair to blame parents?
Definitely fair to blame the parents. If you have a child, it is your responsibility to make sure that that child doesn't grow up to actually commit offences. I am sick to death of living in a society where people are blaming the problems on society. It's your bad parenting that means that child has gone out and committed offence. You know, if they're living in your house, you need to know what is going on. I've had children and I know how difficult it is. And I think what's happened is that as parents, they become softer and softer and softer. What children need, especially when they're teenagers, they need someone that is nurturing and someone that's going to be a disciplinarian to say, you cannot do this.
Daisy is bursting with this statement. But let me just ask one thing first. I have to.
Yeah.
Have you forgotten what it's like to be a teenager?
No, I haven't. I was a pain in the arse, but I had a dad that wouldn't take any nonsense.
But have you forgotten the secret things you got up to when your parents thought you were practising your violin with your pal from
I'm
school,
telling you.
and you were secretly doing something else?
You need someone in that family where the kid's going to say, if I mess up, whether it's the mum or the dad, there's going to be hell to pay. And unfortunately, we have a society where kids are ruling the roost, and that's what the problem is.
Of course, every kid deserves and needs decent parents. You know, that goes without saying, but it's far too simplistic to say that this increase, this huge 16% increase in kids, teenagers committing crimes, is down to parents. Parents haven't just suddenly become rubbish at being parents. There's other stuff going on. The stuff that, the reason we've got more truants since the pandemic, because so many kids got out of the habit of going to school when all the schools were closed down, which I'm sure that Wilfred will agree that that was a big mistake and has damaged a lot of children in the process. We've got all sorts of other things going on. We've got, gangs that are out of control. We've got county lines going on. We've got all sorts of peer pressure going on kids. And I'm not saying that these kids shouldn't be responsible for their own behaviour, but it is not the case that suddenly their parents have become very bad at parenting. That's much too simplistic. There's other stuff going on.
Wilfred, would you not agree, though, that some young people turn to crime not because they're wicked, really, and not because their parents haven't brought them up properly, but as Daisy suggests, because they live in the kind of area or the sort of place where they are in the orbit of gangs and they're put under such colossal pressure, and part of the pressure is not to tell their parents.
Look, it's all about cultural change. And I think that I can remember when I was brought up as a kid that parents had a much stronger role and responsibility towards their children as we do now. What tends to happen is because it's someone else's problem rather than the parents feeling it's their responsibility. It's that cultural change that I think is responsible for all the crime that you're seeing, for all that issues you're having, because parents are now feeling that somebody else is going to look after the problem.
So you don't think that these statistics could have something to do with the pandemic, could have something to do with lockdown, could have something to do with the cost of living crisis, could have something to do with the fact we've got more families in poverty than we had pre-pandemic?
Daisy, every generation would have had their issues and their problems. Every generation would have something they could point to. But the attitude towards parenting is what has changed. Absolutely.
But I wonder, Wilfred, how many, particularly of the young men, whose fathers were incredibly draconian when it came to imposing discipline and would say, go and choose a switch from the garden, choose the belt, go and get a slipper, I'm going to show you right from wrong on a Friday night, give them a good old beating. I wonder how many of those are currently detained at His Majesty's pleasure. The sorts of young, particularly boys, who were severely disciplined but still went on to commit all kinds of crime. It certainly didn't obliterate crime from those families. It didn't mean that they weren't disciplined, but they certainly went on anyway.
But there are different types of bad parenting. Beating a child up ain't good parenting, basically. So I'm not trying to say you've got to have a pretty hard line. I'm talking about the sense of responsibility. You have to find a way to bring that child up so they know that actually their responsibility about how they behave is down to you as a parent. And I think that if a lot of parents had to end up in prison or got prosecuted because of the actions of their child, you probably get more parents taking a lot more responsibility rather than allowing these kids to get on with it.
You really think that the threat of locking up a parent is
I'm
going
not saying
to
locking
create
up,
better kids
no, but what
and
I'm trying to
better
say
parenting?
is this, is that what I understand, for example, if you're under a certain age and your child ends up in court, as a parent, you have to go to that court. I think that should be to the age of 18. If you're living at home with your parents and you commit a crime,
Well, I would
as the
agree with
parent, you are got to be responsible. That's the way that I
And we did have a ridiculous case recently. We won't go into the ins and outs of the specific cases where a mum was in Ibiza on holiday
Yes,
when her kid.
yes,
But nobody would think that's a good look for a parent. Nobody would think that was good parenting.
seriously nuts.
But the issues are just more complicated than it's always mum and dad's
Well, no,
fault.
but you start off from that point that as a parent, you are ultimately responsible. The way that child actually comes up in life is down to you. I just think that sort of sense has gone away from a lot of people. They think send them to school, the teachers will actually determine how they actually grow up. It ain't. It's down to every way that you bring them up is going to determine
Wilfred,
how they
all
become.
the interviews that you hear and read when awful crimes have been committed, and you see, the charming and God-fearing parents, sobbing and saying, I thought he was a good boy. I've always thought he was a terrific kid. He's really,
But you failed as a parent, so therefore you might have been too lenient. You might, I could tell you with my kids, when my kids were teenagers and they wanted to go to a party, if I didn't know who the parents were, if I didn't know who the kids they were going, they weren't going. It's about what you have to understand is that teenagers will be teenagers, and so you are the first guardian to make sure everything they're going to be doing isn't going to land them in trouble.
So how do we get these parents who have these troublesome kids to be better parents? Like, how do we literally make them, as a society, do that? Because that's one of the problems. You say it can't be up to teachers, but of course teachers do have a role in this, and we're always told that they are meant to be the eyes and ears of social services, and they're meant to be tipping off social services if they think that there's bad parenting going on, and yet a lot of teachers are very uncomfortable with that role that they're put on. So there are multiple issues.
But it's the death of the extended family. We are old enough to remember the extended family where there are grandparents, there are uncles, there are aunts, people who are all responsible for our care. The nuclear family has meant it's killed up all of that, and people think it's down to the individual single parent or the state to take responsibility. And I just think we need to go back and look at, actually, it is the family that's ultimately responsible.
But what if geography has meant that a family has had to move? What if, social and family breakdown, divorce has meant that a family has splintered off? This kind of fantasy of a village raising a child, it's fantastic. Who wouldn't like that? And who wouldn't like grandmas and aunties and uncles all down the road? Of course we would.
Vanessa, everybody faces the same problem. The challenges that we have as parents is, as we're developing as a society, we still ultimately are the people that are responsible. We bring a child in this world, we want the best of that child. Sometimes we have to take the tough decisions in order for that child to go and prosper to be a reasonable adult.
But also that kid needs role models, and whatever's going on at home, we know that the closure of things like boxing gyms and youth centres and all these places where particularly young, energetic men, young sort of teenagers who might be getting into trouble can go and let off steam and have role models. Those places have closed down.
Let me chuck something that might irritate the hell out of you. Maybe that actually the problem is the feminising of society. We're actually nurturing and being soft is one of the reasons why
I was just saying I'd like to see
the opposite. All right,
Thank
you. Let's hear from some of our callers and see what they say. Julia's on the line in Sheffield. Hi, Julia. Good morning.
Good morning, Vanessa. Morning, panel.
What do you think, Julia, about this?
Well, I think basically that the parents cannot be held responsible for the most part for everything that their children do. And you can't be in two places at one time. If you're out at work, a lot of people now work very long hours, antisocial hours, where they are not able to be there for their children when they get home from school. And after that, what they do, well, God only knows, because I brought up my two completely on my own. And I know that my daughters have been involved in trouble, that they carried knives. I've been to the police station, get my oldest out after she's been fighting. This is at age 15. And I know as well she fought in part, well, on occasion, because of me, because we have a disability, which people would pick on and use against her. And her being the kind of child she is, she weren't going to stand for it. So there are all kinds of different reasons, different nuances, subtleties involved in why children get into trouble.
But Julia, talk to me about this. What I'd like to know is the bit where you've gone to the police station, your daughter's in trouble, and you're together on the way home, whether you're walking, you're on the bus, or however you're going home. What happens next? Because obviously it's been a shock to you. Obviously you're a hugely caring parent. You're highly responsible. What would you do next to try to stop that cycle?
It's very difficult. Yeah. It's very difficult indeed. Because by now they're in with a circle of friends, and the friends may share her sort of behavioural patterns, if you like.
Yes.
I mean, you can't isolate a child from their environment, from who and what they are. They'll grow up to be who they want to be. All you can do is set a good example. And if they want to follow that, fantastic. But some of them don't. Some of them really don't, and they have to find their own way. And if that means getting into trouble to learn their lessons, well, then that is how it will go, I'm afraid.
And Julia,
what brings you as a parent no amount of stress and hurt and worry. But that's sort of part and parcel of growing up. Nowadays, with the influence of social media, the drugs around now that play an enormous part in children getting into trouble.
And I'd like to know, Julia, how she's doing now. I'm hoping that you've sort of come through that phase and you're out the other side. But you tell me what's going on now.
Well, she's hitting 40 next year.
Okay.
You know, she's parent herself. I'm an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old, and she's put her talents to good use, actually. She works as a bouncer.
That's absolutely marvellous. That she was absolutely destined for that career. Thank you so much for the call. So you see, Wilfred, we have here a highly concerned, responsible, involved, hard-working parent who finds her daughter in a circle of friends, in a particular environment, behaving in a certain kind of way.
I'm glad that her daughter's managed to get through that difficult stage. Any of us who've had teenage children know it's really, really challenging. But I still come back to my final point, really, which is that our children are a reflection of our parenting. There's no way around it. It's nothing society's problem. There are massive, massive challenges that we all have to face as parents, but that is the ultimate responsibility that we have. I'm really pleased for that woman that, her child got through it.
Julia, unless, of course, they're rebellious and we've brought them up in a particular way and they want to behave in the opposite way.
Well, of course. I mean, there hardly will be a teenager that doesn't step out of line at some point. Of course, that is just part and parcel of, of going through that stage. But I think Julia made some really, really valid points. And one of them was this business that particularly, I don't know whether Julia was a single mum herself, but she was talking about working very long hours. And a lot of single mums particularly struggle to make ends meet and work extremely long antisocial hours, whether it might be, Uber driving or cleaning or whatever it might be. And you're just not at home as much to keep an eye on what's going on with your kids. And it's very easy. And we have this awful old expression, latchkey kids. But, that's a reality in millions of households up and down the country where the kids are often left to their own devices more than parents would like to leave them to their own devices because of financial reasons.
Absolutely. Let's talk to Alan on the line in Oxfordshire. Alan, is it the parents' responsibility if their children commit some kind of crime?
Hello?
Hello, Alan. Is it the parents' responsibility, do you think, if their children go off the rails and commit crime?
Not entirely. Parents, of course, are partly to blame, but society and the do-gooders love to interfere, and they take away a lot of the parents' rights to control children. My mother brought up myself and my brother on her own, held down 3 jobs. We were evacuated during the war, and my mother caned me on occasions, and there's really nothing wrong with that. She has to control us, and she did, in a loving way. And our 3 children, 5 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. We've had comments on their good behaviour and our own children. And society has to accept that they are in part to blame. If they want to take away parents' control, then they must accept the responsibility.
Did you use the cane on your own children?
No.
Why not? Because you've just told us that your mother used the cane on you. She loved you. She was an excellent parent. Why did you not do the same thing if you thought it was a good idea?
But may I say that my brother went to the fair one evening, came home with a very short cane, and Mother used that on me. And I cut it into 4 pieces and put it under the cushion. But going on from that, I did slap our middle child once on the back of the leg, just one slap, and she walked into the lounge and collapsed because she'd held her breath.
Oh.
And my wife shouts out, "What have you done?" And, of course, I've never slapped her again.
Alan, thank you for the call. Let's move on to Anne. Anne's on the line in Hertfordshire. Hello, Anne. Is it the parents' responsibility if their children commit a crime?
Yeah, because you're the parent. You're supposed to teach your children the difference between right and wrong, which I did. My son, I was shopping with my son 3 weeks before Christmas when he was 9. He's 28 now. And he stole a toy in Sainsbury's. He put it under his coat. I told him he couldn't have it. It was 3 weeks to Christmas. Wait and see what he got for a present. And he didn't listen to me. He stole it. I got collared as I left the store, got taken to the manager's office. Wow. I immediately took my son down the police station and told the police officer what he did. The police officer showed him the cell, showed him around the cells. We went back to Sainsbury's. He apologised to the manager. And I said to him, my son's going to come in every Friday and pay you £1 a week till he's paid this £9 back. And I gave him a month's detention. He'd go to school, come home for a month every day, not to see his friends. I made him say that.
Wow, blimey, gosh. You get
round of applause.
Wow.
He cuddled me and said, "I'm really sorry, Mum, I'll never do it again." Now he's 28, he's got a degree from university, and he's got a fantastic job at British Aerospace, and he's turned into a good boy.
Well, that is a fantastic story. These days, of course, you'd have trouble finding a police station since so many of them have been closed down, wouldn't you? Let alone a friendly cop to show your son a police cell.
And Vanessa, we haven't really talked about the police in this context, but we all know about the epidemic of shoplifting, and a lot of these crimes are things like shoplifting. And a lot of these kids, teenagers, young people, know that they're not going to get done for shoplifting. So, and that's, I would say that's really, yes, Anne made a great example there, but if you've got a lot of peer pressure saying, let's go down to the local shop and just fill our boots and nobody's going to get in trouble or get caught, you can see how those statistics are going to mount up.
Also, when there's colossal mileage made by the new Prime Minister of the fact that we haven't got any space in our prisons, that our prisons are overrun, and a diktat to magistrates' courts saying, don't bang anyone up, please don't put them in prison because we've got nowhere to put them, Wilfred.
Well, it's all about every day there'll be somebody coming into my farm shop trying to nick some stuff.
Exactly.
Every day.
You're a victim of that.
And I could say the audacity is just what's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And the reason why there's audacity is that when there isn't any consequence, we're bringing up a society where young people are sort of learning they could do things and there will not be a consequence. You've got to bring back consequence for people to sort of learn there are certain things that are not acceptable.
Well, thank you very much indeed for all your calls so far. And Scott's on the line in Devon. Hello, Scott.
Good morning, Vanessa. Good morning, panel.
Hi. What do you think about this one? Is it the parents' responsibility ultimately?
Well, I think parents play a part, but I think there's a far bigger problem. I think effectively these days kids are given a label at a very young age, whether that's ADHD, autism, anxiety, and from my viewpoint, what I see it is a label that carries it gives them an excuse effectively for their behaviour, and it carries them on through life. And the worrying thing is that how's that going to affect them in later life, because they just continue to use the label as an excuse for behaviour.
But you're saying, Scott, that there's a kind of direct line. OK, this child has ADHD, therefore it doesn't matter if this child shoplifts. But I don't know whether that really is a line that's drawn between the two things. It's not an excuse or an explanation, is it?
I think to a degree, parents will probably see the child as needing some additional support, and therefore they're probably not judged the same way as when I was a kid. I was a naughty kid. It was as simple as that. If I did something wrong, I was a naughty kid. I didn't have a label for it. I was just naughty. So I think the discipline element is viewed very differently for kids that possibly do have a diagnosed
something on the spectrum,
sort of,
one of the spectrums. Do you think that's correct?
Yes, yeah.
Let me ask Daisy whether she agrees.
I totally understand where Scott's coming from. I think, however, there are issues like dyslexia, which have been proven that a lot of dyslexic kids who are not diagnosed at school end up falling behind, not being able to read and write properly. And if you look at our prison population, the percentage of particularly young men who were never diagnosed and end up totally illiterate, truanting from school, getting into gangs and ending up in prison is huge, the number of dyslexics. Now, obviously Scott wasn't talking about dyslexia there. He was talking about things like ADHD and so on. But I do think that a diagnosis for something like that, a lot of people think, oh, it's terribly fashionable and too many kids are being diagnosed. But in some ways, it's helpful to get a diagnosis if you can stop kids falling back with their schoolwork.
It isn't, because everybody has a problem. Everybody will find something where they're not perfect. It's fair to understand whatever the issue may be in life. You shouldn't use that as an excuse.
But explain to me why so many prisoners have dyslexia, because it's a huge number, huge percentage.
So it's a huge number. So what is happening is that what we are learning as we develop as a society, we learn how we could do things better, how we could educate better, and where actually people now realising that dyslexia is a gift, because it means you've got the way of thinking outside the box, really. But what I don't want to do...
But it can make kids hate school if they don't understand why they can't keep up with the other kids.
But what I'm trying to say, in the past, that's what used to happen. But what I think is really, really bad as a society is to come up with an excuse of why it then means they behave in a particular way. I just think that anyone will find some sort of issue, maybe too fat, maybe too small. There's lots of things we could point to as the reasons why we behave the way that we do. Don't justify our behaviour based on some syndrome. We live in a society that's syndrome, this syndrome, that. It's a nonsense.
Well, that's right. The connection between the two obviously doesn't make any kind of sense. Let's talk to Angela in Cardiff. Hi, Angela.
Good afternoon, Krishna. Hi. I spent my nursing career looking after sick newborn babies, and I know there are a lot of people out there who believe that people are born evil. I don't believe that. I used to stand in the nursery and look at these beautiful human beings and think there are some people out there who believe that some of you could be evil, and I don't believe that. But you see the interactions of families. You come in visiting, and you can predict the problems that are going to arise. And I one day I was driving home from work and I drove alongside a vehicle where a child had just been on our unit visiting the sibling. And I looked and smiled at him, and he put his middle finger up at me. So, what sort of example? He must have been about 3, I suppose.
So can I ask you something, Angela? When you were in the ward and obviously doing this tremendous job of, welcoming babies into the world, and you looked at a family, or you looked at whoever was around the bed of the new mum, and you thought, gosh, that child is really going to be up against it being born into that family. What were the sort of behaviours that you saw that made you think, gosh, this child is really going to have a challenging life in that family? What were your kind of red alert signals?
The interactions between the parents, often you'd see children, like on one example, for example, a father raised his arm to do something and one of the children cowered, thinking, and you think, that child thinks it's going to be hit. So, of course, we also had to document all of that. But there have been some appalling examples that I've seen of parenting right from the very start. And then you think, you can just see. We used to use the expression years ago, ripping radios out of cars. Of course, they don't do that now. But that was we say, you can see what's going to happen with this family, and you'd alert.
And let me ask you then, do you think that it is not just the parents, the way in which they brought them up, but also their responsibility kind of in law that these parents should be brought to book?
Absolutely. I've just did a case in America where a 14-year-old's parents are being jailed because their son has killed people. So
They
I
bought
think
them the gun,
we need to start doing that. Yeah, bought him a gun, yes. Yeah. So I just can't get my head around that at all. I can't.
Angela,
So,
thank you.
yeah,
Thank you very
observation.
much indeed for the call, and thanks so much for all the calls on that subject.